Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to work on a deep dive into the Ork Codex. We're going to talk about the Green Tide Detachment, and we will be working on more detachment videos over the next week or two, so look forward to seeing some more of these drop as well. We're going to talk about the detachment rules, and then we're going to talk about the enhancements and then stratagems, and we're going to follow it up with whether or not I think this detachment has any real comp or competitive viability. It's one of those where I'm not going to tell you how to play it, but I am going to kind of talk you through why I think it could or couldn't be competitively viable. And I'm not going to post a list, but I am going to kind of walk you through what I think would make a good list. You know, so again, if you want a hard written list, let me know in the comments and I will copy it to a Google Doc or a PDF and I'll post it in the comments. Your detachment bonus is the mob mentality. Each time an attack targets a boys unit from your army, models in that unit have a 5-up invulnerable save against that attack. And each time an attack targets an Orks unit, you that has 10 or more models, you reroll saving throws of 1 against that attack. So that's all saves, not just invulns, not just regular. It just says saving throws, so that's all of them. And no, feel no pains are not a saving throw, just throwing that out there now. Only boys get the 5-up invuln, but that's still great. It's nice to have somebody throwing like neg 2 or neg 3 at my boys and I'm not just picking them up type of thing. So I think that's a really solid durability buff for boys. Rerolling saves of 1 with 10 plus units is also awesome, especially because that's all units. That's not just boys. That's anything with the Orks keyword. And there's some ways you can kind of make that work for other things in your army really well, even if they can't get 10 models. And we'll talk about that. And I think this is a great detachment for those horde lovers, those guys who really want to put those big blobs of orc boys out there. You know, I've got a buddy. He used to play a lot of really orc boy heavy lists, and even he and I talked about it throughout ninth because I just couldn't see the viability. But I also come from like that speed freaks mentality. But man, he made it work. So good for him, and hopefully this makes him happy. The enhancements are all pretty much infantry only. I don't know yet because as of right now, I'm writing this before I've gotten the whole complete codex. There's a couple things I don't have. I assume most of it is literally just infantry only and not going to be locked to just a regular plain war boss. Ferocious show offs, +1 strength or +3 strength if in a unit with 10 or more models. I think this is fantastic on a war boss. It's really cheap and it gives orcs a high strength melee unit that isn't on a walker. The boss goes to 13 strength with 10 or more bodies, 14 on the wall. So again, like that's one of my biggest complaints about the Ork Index and really the Ork Codex is that I don't mind that we don't have 3 or 4 damage melee, even though there's plenty of other armies that do on their characters, right? And even like some of the non-melee armies out there have just dudes that are like, well, this is 3 damage in melee, and I'm just like, man, why are my power claws 2? Why are my kill saws 2? But if things had higher strength, I don't think that would really bother me as much. Like Power Claws being strength 9 is kind of weird, and this kind of helps mitigate that. Sure, it's only a single model, but if I have a War Boss who is strength 13 or 14, I can now reasonably charge him into almost anything and wound it on 3s. And I think the highest toughness I've seen so far in this game might be 14, so wounding it on 4s on the wall, I can get down with that. And at 10 points, I just think it's cheap enough that you can slap it on a boss. It's awesome. Like, oh, I've got 10 points, we just slap it on my war boss. Brutal but cunning is 25 points. On a 5-up, you gave a command point in your command phase, and it's on a 3-up if you're in a unit with 10 or more models. If you're not taking Gretchen, I think this is worth because it's cheaper than a unit of Gretchen by 15 points, and it will reliably give you that extra command point. Although, if you have multiple units of Gretchen, you can put them on objectives, they'll control objectives, and you're more likely to get the command point. So it's one of those like kind of a trade off. If you don't want to bring Gretchen, it's a good replacement to make sure you can still get those command points. If you are bringing a couple units of Gretchen, I just don't think it's worth it. But that's really where it's at is do I bring Gretchen or do I don't? If yes, I don't need this. If no, I probably bring it. Bloodthirsty Belligerents, it's 15 points. You reroll advance rolls, reroll charge rolls also if you have 10 or more bodies in the unit. This is a lot like show offs. The cheap cost makes it worth slapping on a boss. But overall, I just don't know that it's worth it to consistently reroll advance rolls and charge rolls. Obviously, the charge rolls could be helpful, especially if you're coming out of deep strike or something along those lines or strategic reserves. But overall, it's just I don't know that it's worth it. Like maybe on a unit of Storm Boys, right? You could drop them out of Deep Strike and have a reliable, well, not reliable, but a rerollable charge, things like that. Like there's probably ways to make it worth, but I think the only boss you can put in Storm Boys, if I remember right, is Zagstruck anyway. So again, can't even take the enhancement. Raucous Warcaller. So if it's infantry locked and not restricted to only a regular war boss, I think this is great on a mega armor war boss because it gives mega knobs a 2+ save rerolling ones because they have the orc keyword. They'll count as 10 or more bodies. I didn't put it on the screen, but that's what it does is his unit always counts as having 10 or more models. Mega knobs having a 2-up save, rerolling ones, really really handy. And a good example of where I wish I would have had that is last two events I went to, I hit Sisters of Battle round 2, and you know I think both games the Arcoflagellants charged into Mega Knobs, and they didn't kill a lot, but the fact that they just crushed me through weight of dice meant that I was gonna roll enough that I'm failing them. So if I had to roll 40 saves, if I rolled 20 ones, but I also get to re-roll all those ones, they're way more likely to not take that damage. They're way more likely to survive. And I just think that that's a great durability buff for a unit that's already pretty durable, especially given their datasheet change. They gain a 4-up feel no pain on the wall, so once one battle round per game, they could be really, really tough to shift. It does add some durability to boys, but again, I just don't think it's worth it to boys. And you can combine them with go get them to auto surge if you've got a small unit of boys. But overall, I just Warcaller to me only makes sense if you put it on a character that's going into a like smaller unit, a unit that can't get that big. It could be good on like a biker boss, except he's not infantry. Like all the enhancements are infantry locked, but if you could, it would be good on him. Things like that. I guess you could put maybe a 5-man of knobs type of thing. But overall, I just think the Mega Armor War Boss is probably the best choice for this. Unless you've got a unit of truck boys, maybe, like boys in trucks, I should say, that you're just going to, try to use as a torpedo. Arguably, you lose a couple, you can bring some back. But overall, I just don't think it's worth putting on a regular war boss who's going in a boys unit specifically. Let's talk about the stratagems. Honestly, most, if not all of them, are, I don't want to say very good, but they're really good and very usable. I don't see any where I'm like, well, this is oppressive or this is broken. There's one or two where they're very just situationally good, but still usable. And that's what I like seeing out of this detachment is that you have a lot of tools that are they're very solid. They're very usable, which is fantastic. Most of the strats are boys locked, if not all of them, and this makes sense. Like I said, I don't have the full context of the full codex. I'm going off of a lot of the leaks right now. And even when I played with this detachment, I just assumed everything was boys locked because I didn't want to I'd rather err on the side of this benefits my opponent, like I can't use this on anything other than boys, than err on the side of, well, I get to just use this wherever. Because there's a couple things where I'm not sure if it's boys or mob, and I just assumed it was boys, because there is a mob keyword. Bulldozer, Brutality, boys unit gets a 3-inch fight range. Again, situationally good, but very good when you need it, because if you make a poor charge roll and you can't pile everything in, it allows you to get more bodies fighting because it gives you that 3-inch bubble to fight in instead of just base to base to base to base. And it also helps mitigate getting tagged in two different places to kind of split attacks. Like you'll still have to split attacks, but when you use that strat, you're going to be able to throw more dice into both of those units that are trying to like tag you on each side to spread your attacks out. So overall, like I said, situationally good, but solid, very usable. Come on, lads. D3 plus 2 orcs to a mob unit. I assume it's mob, but again, when I played, I only did it to boys just to make sure I wasn't doing something that would benefit me over my opponent. But it's even if it's boys locked, still fantastic because getting 3 to 5, you know, orc boys every command phase, that's awesome. If you look at it in terms of points, the worst you're going to do is you're going to get 8, 16, 24 points, I think it is, right? Maybe it's 27. I can't remember if they're 8 or 9 off the top of my head. But either way, you're getting 24, 27 points back every turn if you use it. Fantastic. And if you build your list right, they're going to be pretty durable, and it's going to surprise people how hard they could be to shift. And if we assume that the Pain Boy still has his once per game replenished D3, because most of the data sheets, from what I've seen, have not changed, although the changes that have been made are very good. This could really increase the durability of a unit, getting D3 plus 2 plus 1 D3 once per game on a unit of 20 bodies at T5 with a 5-up invuln that rerolls saves of 1. That's meaty. That's going to help you sit on an objective. And, if you're playing where I really find that this is going to be powerful is when you're playing against a lot of opponents like Guard or the Craft World players who just spam indirect, and I'm just like, fine, shoot my boys. Because if you don't shoot my boys, I'm closing this distance, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it doesn't matter to me. That being said, like I said, I think this is a very, very solid overall strat. Probably the best one in the detachment. Competitive streak would probably be my pick for second best or tied for best, and that's reroll wounds of 1 in the fight phase or reroll wounds completely if 10 up. Fantastic strat. Obviously, you're only getting it on one unit, but if you can get all models in that unit swinging and you're on the wall, that's a minimum of 80 dice that hits on 3 plus rerolling wounds. And they're all at least -1 AP. And this means like these will punch up even if they're not on the wall, you're getting 3 attacks. That's 60 dice hitting on 3s. When you're re-rolling the wounds, you're going to punch up because eventually you're going to spike, right? Like you might get a bad roll, but that re-roll could spike also. And then once you add a War Boss and or a Pain Boy and then a Power Claw from your knob into the mix, like you're going to do damage. I got to play 2 games of this, and my unit of boys with my War Boss just deleted everything they touched because I just saved this strat, charged it in. One of my opponents was playing Death Guard, and he had the 2 Plague Burst Crawlers, and it was just like, sure, man, kill my boys, do your thing. But then he charged his Death Shroud into the middle of the board into 5 commandos because he was like, I'm going to take that middle of the board in true power armor fashion. And then when I countercharged him, it was just with boys. And he was just like, what are they? And I was telling him, they're just like, this is what they do. And he was just like, oh, whatever. And it was boys with typhus, So I'm hitting on 4s, actually, or maybe even 5s. It was 5s, but 4s because of the War Boss. But it was just like, that's fine because I'm just drowning you in dice. And I'm going to re-roll these wounds. And it's how many 3-ups can you make? And it turns out he couldn't make enough because that unit evaporated. Bragging rights, 2 units of boys within 6 inches of each other count as having 10 models. This one's kind of weird. I think it's one of the weakest strats. It could be situationally good, especially if you are trying to hold an objective that has maybe like 2 units of boys on it that have been pummeled or shot or whatever. So overall, it's not bad. It has some situational use. I just don't think I don't see how this is going to come up very often. I think once you start getting down that low, if you have 2 units of boys next to each other, that just seems weird. Unless again you just had a few 10-man units that you kind of charged onto one objective and then a couple of them took some damage. But like I said, it's just kind of weird, especially because it's boys only and their minimum squad size is 10. Overall, it's just odd. Tide of Muscle, you add the current battle round to charge rolls for a unit of boys. This is awesome. Any round, it's awesome. Getting a +1 to charge turn 1 is meaty and very, very good. But the fact that you could round two, right, depending on the timing, round two, you could get a +2 charge out of Deep Strike or Strategic Reserves. Obviously, not Deep Strike because it's going to be boys. Or a weird boy, right? Like you could jump him and then bam. So, like turn 3 or 4, if you needed to, you could jump a weird boy and then have a 5 or 6 inch charge out of Deep Strike. That's fantastic and is very reliable. I think Tide of Muscle is up there with the best of the strats in the Codex, or at least this detachment. And then go get them. It's a World Eater style surge move. It's D6 inches. It's 6 inches if 10 or more models. It should be boys locked. I didn't use it in the 2 games that I played. I just kind of like kept moving, kept moving. There are probably times, and there's probably armies where you're going to want it. You know, those 3 inch deep strike armies, that's going to keep them very honest. If they know you could just 6 inch move into them after they shoot you, there's a good chance they're just going to be like, nah, that ain't me. I'm not going to 3 inch deep strike on you, which is fine with me because that's one of the sillier parts about this game right now is the amount of units and armies that have access to it. So having something to potentially be like, nah, dog, you're not coming in here, and if you do, I'm coming to you. You know, so it's one of those like really good deterrents. Like just knowing it's in your pocket is a great deterrent, and that to me is really where it shines. What it does is less important than what it could help prevent your opponent from doing. Overall, I think this has a lot of comp viability. I don't think it's going to be an oppressive detachment, but I do think it'll score well, and I think it should stay on the table pretty well if you lean into the durability aspect of the detachment. You know, you take 80 or more boys and then, you know, some units that can support them. I think 20 boys with a pain boy will give the unit a 5-up invuln, a 5-up feel no pain. You'll re-roll saves of 1. The pain boy replenishes a D3 once per game. You have a strat to replenish D3 plus 2. And if you bring 3 of those units, which is what I did, I brought 60 boys all built like that. And honestly, like both the Death Guard and the Marine player just struggled to remove. The Marine player much more so, but to be fair, the Marine player was a little bit newer, and he just was like, "Yeah, bring 60 boys. That sounds hilarious." You know, like they knew going into it what we were doing. I didn't bamboozle anybody, but man, once he started seeing like me re-rolling saves and all this other stuff, he was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is exhausting." So that's what I would do, and I think my list was 80 boys, and we'll kind of dig into it. Like I said, I'm not going to post it on the screen, and I'm not going to give you the exact list just because I don't have it right in front of me, but I will kind of give it overall. And if you guys, like I said at the beginning, want to see it, drop a comment, and then I'll get a doc put up and put it in the comments as well. Boys at strength 4, -1 means they have pretty solid damage output into infantry, and they will chip wounds on vehicles. But once you start stacking it with the reroll wound strat, their damage output escalates quite a bit, especially with a knob and a war boss and a pain boy. You know, so it's one of those where overall their damage output is actually going to be pretty decent in this detachment. And if you're on the wall, they go to strength 5, which is going to help them out considerably. I think this is a detachment that could play very well into fixed or tactical. Fixed, you're going to want to make sure you either have Gretchen or that enhancement just so you can make sure you're getting the extra CP, because to me that's where tactical really outperforms fixed, is just having access to extra CP whenever you need it. I do think it's a fun, flavorful detachment that has a lot of solid comp potential. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be oppressive. I think it's going to be very matchup specific. And if it does come out and it starts just like shit rolling the meta, you're just going to see a shift to things like burst cannons and heavy bolters and just like very high volume shooting. And that's really where the game gets interesting, is when you have books that have multiple detachments that can play in multiple flavors, because now we're not relying so much on the data slate to fix meta. We can rely on, you know, the rock paper scissors aspect of the game to kind of fix the shifting meta, because again, I don't think any of the detachments in this book are oppressive. I think most, if not all of them, are very viable and solid and fun and flavorful. So within the context of the Codex, I'm not comparing it to what's meta or any other books, but within the context of this codex, I think this detachment's 4 out of 5. It's fun. It can do damage. It can interact and score points. I don't think it'll be oppressive. I think there's still going to be some matchups where it probably struggles to do what it needs to do simply because you still have to kind of get there. And, moving and positioning a lot of boys is one of those things where if you're not used to doing it, you're going to struggle to do it efficiently. And, if you get out of position, even though they can be pretty durable, you're still going to lift some boys. And if you kind of get sloppy with your positioning, you're going to end up hurting yourself in the long run. Overall, like I said, I think it's 4 out of 5. I think it's from a comp perspective, I honestly I think from a comp perspective, most of the book, again, within the context of the book, is probably in that like 3 or 4 out of 5 rating range. Not like I'm ranking these from worst to best, but in a just like one is this detachment's unplayable even in a narrative game, and then 5 is this detachment is going to be broken. I think all of them kind of sit in that 3 to 4 range. Uh, Personally, that's my take. Big shout out to our YouTube member, Kevin. I appreciate it, buddy. You got fantastic. I appreciate the support. Hatchling, Real Donnie G, appreciate you, buddy. Phoenix, Jamie, thank you for the support. Immortals, Lord Wellingstone, Danny Boy, and Captain Toothall, you guys are the real OGs, and I appreciate the support as well. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.